Welcome to In Her Image, a podcast where we seek and celebrate our Mother God through scripture, scholarship, and the arts. Today we're going to be hearing a lovely story from Brynne Canozo. Brynne is an incredible artist who does pottery and sculpture. She is passionate about the divine feminine and building intentional communities. She creates incredible goddess sculptures that are uniquely created to support each woman individually. And she makes these on commission. I've seen them and I want one. Someday, Brynne, it's going to happen. She is a mother to 3 beautiful boys and is an aspiring homesteader. One of my favorite things about Brynne is that she's an incredible storyteller. So I asked her to share the story from a collection of tales called Sunday Moon Day. So Brynne, if you wouldn't mind just jumping in.
Minerva and Arachne, a Roman myth. The goddess Minerva was very good at settling arguments. She had a clear head and a kind heart. Many people tried to get her help, and even the gods themselves asked her advice. Should they go to war? Who was right and who was wrong? Minerva always tried to make peace if she could, but if there was a battle, she knew better than anyone how to fight it. And if Minerva herself decided to go to war, even the gods trembled. She was fierce, brave, and skillful, and no one wanted her as their enemy. But Minerva hardly ever quarreled, and only once did she lose her temper. This is how it happened. It was not in battle. It was not in some argument with the gods, or because one of the other goddesses had insulted her. It was all to do with a young girl called Arachne, and Minerva's great skill as a weaver. Minerva was not only a goddess of war, but the goddess who taught women the special arts of spinning, weaving, sewing, cooking, and embroidery. Everyone knew that she was the finest teacher of these arts, and that they needed her help and her inspiration. Everyone, that is, except Arachne. Now, Arachne herself was an excellent weaver. She came from a dyer's family, from a little village that was famous for making the most beautiful purple dye for wool. So Arachne grew up with spinning, dyeing, and weaving going on all around her. From early on, she learned how to spin the wool from a soft fleece into strong threads, how to set up a loom, and how to weave cloth upon it. As she grew older, she began to weave beautiful designs in rich colors on her loom. She could embroider her cloth with wonderful pictures, too, and people came from far and wide to admire her work. When the local girls heard that Arachne was finishing a new piece of cloth, they would leave their flocks or their washing by the stream or their baking in the kitchen and run up to her workshop to admire it. "The goddess Minerva herself must be your teacher," they said, as they watched her quick and graceful fingers at work. "No," said Arachne, "I've learned how to do it all by myself. I don't need Minerva to teach me." She laughed scornfully. The others looked at each other uneasily. It was not wise to ignore the gifts of a goddess. Arachne bent over her work to bite off a thread. When she looked up, she saw a wrinkled, gray-haired old woman standing in front of her, leaning on a stick. She sat up in surprise. Who was this old woman? What was she doing creeping into Arachne's workshop like this? "What do you want?" she asked, rather rudely. "Just to give you a few kind words of advice, my dear," said the old lady. "I have lost my beauty long ago. You are still young and beautiful. But other things come with age, you know, and one of them is wisdom. And so, I want to warn you. Be careful how you speak about a goddess like Minerva. She may hear you, and I think you should say that you are sorry. Admit that she is the finest weaver of all, and then perhaps she will forgive you." "What?" cried Arachne, jumping up. "You silly old fool! You aren't wise at all. Go and give your stupid advice to one of your own daughters. Don't try giving it to me. If Minerva's so great, where is she? Why doesn't she appear?" "She is here!" a voice proclaimed. Arachne watched in astonishment. Gone was the old woman, and in her place stood the great goddess Minerva herself. She had thrown off her disguise and was now appeared in all her glory. The glance from her brilliant eyes was piercing. The other girls covered their faces to protect themselves from her fierce gaze. But Arachne stared back boldly, although her heart was beating wildly. "And now," said Minerva, "let us put this to the test. You boast that you can weave as well as I can. Come, let us see if this is true." So the great contest began. Looms were set up, and never had two such different weavers worked in the same room. The mighty goddess Minerva and the young country girl Arachne, who thought herself as good as the goddess. Hour after hour, day after day, the work progressed. All the women of the village, and far from beyond it, came to see the extraordinary sight, creeping in and out in a hushed silence. The goddess herself was weaving at the loom. Her shuttle flew to and fro, and a shimmering rainbow of colors began to take shape upon it. People gasped when they saw the beauty of her work. And they gasped too when they began to see the pictures that were growing there, for she had chosen to show the gods themselves in her cloth. Here were the 12 great deities of heaven sitting on their thrones, with Jupiter ruling over them. Here was Neptune, the god of the rivers and seas, holding his trident. Here was Minerva herself, wearing full battle dress, with her helmet and spear, her famous shield with the Gorgon's head upon it, dripping with serpents. Her spear pointed toward an olive tree, the tree that she had invented, her special gift to the world. Everything in this picture was magnificent, and showed how splendid the life of the gods was, but in each corner Minerva wove a smaller picture, and these pictures showed what happened to humans who thought themselves as good as the gods. Stories of how they were turned into storks, or stone steps, or came to a dreadful end because of their reckless behavior. This was certainly a message for Arachne, if she was ready to take notice. Meanwhile, Arachne was also creating a beautiful cloth. But she chose different stories to weave, and these were stories about how the gods had tricked and cheated young girls. She showed how Jupiter had changed himself into a bull so he could carry off the maiden Europa, and how Neptune had appeared as many creatures, a dolphin, a horse, or a bird, to name but a few, so that he could come close to the young woman that he wanted and make love to her. At last the cloths were finished, and everyone waited eagerly to see how they would be judged. Which was best? Could Arachne really weave as well as the goddess? Minerva inspected the tapestries. To her horror, she could find no fault in Arachne's work at all. It was perfect. And then the goddess lost her temper. She was furious. How could this ignorant girl produce work that was as good as her own? How could she match her colors so brilliantly and make her figures so real? It was too much. Arachne had insulted her, Minerva, who had invented the art of weaving and who had taught her precious skill to these ungrateful humans. What is more, she had insulted the gods by depicting them as cheats and kidnappers. "I will not put up with this," she decided in a fury. She grabbed Arachne's tapestry and ripped it in two. Then she tore it wildly until it lay in shreds on the floor. She picked up her shuttle and attacked Arachne, shrieking like the owl that was her own bird, and hit Arachne over and over again. Arachne could not bear the attack any longer. She had won the competition, but she could only be a loser in battle with Minerva, the goddess of war. With a heartbroken cry, she ran into the next room, out of Minerva's reach. Here she threw a rope over the beam and tried to hang herself. Only then, at last, did Minerva's temper melt away. Looking at Arachne, she began to feel sorry for the girl. But she was not sorry enough to let her go on living as a human being. "You are a wicked girl," she said. Yet I won't let you die. You shall live, and you shall live forever, but you will hang forever too." So saying, she took out a bitter magic juice and sprinkled Arachne with it. Arachne's face began to shrivel up. Her hair fell off, her ears and nose too. Her body got smaller and rounder, until finally she was transformed into a spider with 8 thin legs and a rounded belly, hanging from her own thread. "Now, Arachne," said Minerva, "hang there and spin forever. Yes, you can spin as much as you like now, and your children and your children's children." And so Arachne the spider began to spin. From that day till this, she has spun her webs, and all her children know how to spin webs too, so that the world is full of spiders spinning, all because of one girl who made the goddess Minerva lose her temper.
Thank you so much, Brynne, for sharing that story. I know that it kind of ends horribly. You'll have to forgive me. My voice is a little bit froggy because I'm recovering from a cold. But I actually do have an important reason why I asked Brynne to share this story. And it's because I actually read this story during a really hard time in my life. And when I read it, it spoke to me in such a different way. And it's almost like I heard different words than what was in the actual story. So to give you some background, through my 10-year faith crisis and faith journey, I had an interesting relationship with garments. And I had years where I wore them out of duty and out of fear and out of shame. And then I had years where I decided not to wear them because wearing them made me feel uncomfortable and made me feel like didn't help me feel closer to God and caused me to feel those feelings of shame and fear instead of feeling uplifted. But a few years ago, I decided that I wanted to change my relationship with my garments. And when I was in the process of figuring out how I wanted to do that, I read this story. And as I read it, it's like I read different words than what were actually there. I read it to my children, and they were somewhat captivated and somewhat distracted as I read it to them. And so maybe I was a little distracted too, but mostly I think I was distracted by the Spirit teaching me as I read it. Because I had a yearning and a desire in my heart to develop a new relationship with my garments. As I read this, I realized that our Heavenly Mother is the weaver. And I felt the Spirit speak that so clearly to me and tell me that she is the one that created and wove these protective garments for me. And that she wanted to wrap me up in her love. And that I could always consider her and one of her names to be the weaver. And even though the story ends horribly and talks about this very jealous goddess who cannot stand having a human being at her same level, I heard a whole nother story as I read it. I heard this story that our Heavenly Mother wants us to be like her, and that she wants us to be our own weavers and to create at the same level that she's created. And I feel like this is a really great example of how the Spirit can speak to us when we are searching and yearning and trying to seek for answers, and how those answers can come into our hearts in the most unusual ways, even through a goddess story that came from Rome that is obviously not full of all the truth, but I heard the truth that was behind the story spoken to my heart and soul. And so I felt that's why I felt like it was important to share this story on the podcast, because of my own personal experience. And I know that everyone is on their own journey when it comes to sacred things, and especially when it comes to their personal relationship with garments. And I don't want to put pressure on anyone to feel like they have to believe anything, but I do want to invite everyone, when you are searching and yearning, to open yourself up to hearing the divine speak to you and teach you in interesting and new ways.
This isn't necessarily about garments, but as I was reading, after I read the story, I mean, I've been familiar with the story since I was a child, but rereading it, I was a little bit horrified. And then I was just kind of thinking through, and I was reading some other analysis, and something that stood out to me was that Minerva, otherwise known as Athena, the weaver, she wasn't her problem. She didn't have a problem with Arachne having the skill. She gave the skill to humanity. She wanted them to develop beautiful things. The problem came when Arachne she was arrogant. She was full of hubris. She wouldn't even acknowledge that this was a divinely given gift, and she took complete credit for it by herself. And then, I mean, Minerva was even willing to engage in a test. She was a compassionate and loving goddess, very just, cool-headed. And the only thing that caused her to really kind of fly into a rage was this haughty, arrogant, throwing it into her face, even kind of making fun of her. Not just her, but also the other gods, which I find interesting. I just think that's an interesting point, that it wasn't that she wasn't getting after her because she had the skill. She wasn't even getting after her because she wanted to compete. It was that she was so arrogant that she wouldn't even acknowledge where the gift came from. And I think that is interesting to think about. That's kind of something that it says in the Bible too, and nothing doth man offend God except for that he doesn't acknowledge his hand in all things. That's just an interesting question to ponder.
Yeah.
Am I seeing the gifts that God gives me? Am I using the gifts that God gives me? Which, again, that doesn't necessarily tie into what you're talking about with garments, but I think that that's something that I'm thinking about with the story, at least.
Yeah. And I think this is why I love storytelling so much, is because, Brynne, you pulled out something completely different out of the story that was important for you to know and understand, and that you needed in that moment. And for me, I pulled out something completely different that I needed in that moment.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what is so beautiful about storytelling, and how the divine can teach us and reach into our hearts and touch our souls and give us those like pricks that help us turn towards them and become more like them.
So you identify our Divine Mother as the weaver. What does the weaver mean for you?
I think the weaver could mean a lot of different things. I believe a weaver is a creator, is a planner. When you think of weaving, you have to have an idea of which string is going to go where before it's ever created, right? So there's strings that run horizontally and there's strings that run laterally. And there's no way without a lot of vision to know what that will look like unless you plan and you have all of the things to create that weaving. But also the fact that lots of different weavings can be used for different things. Some could be used for art on a wall. Some weavings can be used for rugs on the ground. Some weavings could be used as clothing or as blankets. And I think that also could have a lot of incredible parallels and parables to it. But in scriptural terms, I mean, the gods weaved the universe together. And there's this beautiful painting that is done by the color amber, and it is of Heavenly Father, and he's knitting the earth.
I've seen it, yeah.
And when I saw that, I loved it, but also I was just like, why isn't that Heavenly Mother? That would make more sense to me to have her knitting the earth, or both of them together knitting the earth. But the idea is still the same, that a weaver is a creator.
I'm just thinking about sheep and goats and like fiber, wool, and the process of caring for your animals so carefully and making sure they're healthy, and then shearing them, or with some goats, like you can just pluck their hair off. They're shedding goats, and that makes like cashmere. And then once you shear a sheep, you have to take their wool, and then you wash it and you soak it, but you have to do it very gently so that it doesn't mat the wool. And then you pick through you get all the it's called vegetable matter, just like twigs and leaves and stuff. You have to pick through all that and get that out. And then you have to card it, which is like you brush it until until the fibers kind of all go the same direction. And then after that, you put it into like this kind of roll it into this long string of wool called roving. And then you have to spin it. And you spin it, you can spin it on a wheel, or you can spin it on a drop spindle, which, there's so much, it's this ancient technology. And then once you've spun it into, like, you can spin it into very thin and delicate thread, or you can spin it into like this chunky yarn that you can use for like a cute sweater or something like that. And then you have to thread your loom. And depending on how big your loom is, this can take days. And then you're sitting there and you're weaving back and forth. You're moving the threads back and forth. You're putting the shuttle through and pulling it through and bringing it down. And you have to make sure you have, like Meg said, the pattern in your head, and it takes so long. But by the time you're done, you have this beautiful cloth that is, it can have so many different uses. And I think it's an essential, I mean, as humans, unless you like live on the beaches of the Caribbean, you probably need some clothes when it gets cold. And so like, what would you do in Utah in the winter if you don't have clothes, warm clothes? Like, think about going out in a sundress in December. You're just going to be really cold. But if you have a soft woolen shirt and pants and a coat and fleece-lined boots, like, you're going to be toasty and you're going to be able to do what you need to do because somebody wove that cloth and took all of those things and brought them together for that cloth to protect your body.
That is so beautiful, Brynne. Thank you for sharing all the details of what it takes to do that process. And I think that just actually speaks to me right now because I'm going through a journey of trying to refine my own skills as an artist. And I find myself getting frustrated a lot that I'm not there yet. I haven't arrived. But it's not necessarily about arriving. It's about the process. And it makes that end result so much more sweet. Anyway, I think all of these are really beautiful things to think about and ponder on, and they could also mean so many different things for other listeners. So I hope today, as you've listened to this podcast, that you've enjoyed it. Thank you, Brynne, so much for coming on and sharing this beautiful story and sharing your thoughts.
It's a pleasure.
And all of your insights.
It's a pleasure to talk to you, Meg.
I hope that you enjoyed our podcast today. If you feel so inspired, share it with others. And if you haven't yet, please leave us a review. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can make a monthly donation at anchor.fm/inherimage. Tune in next Sunday for another inspiring episode.